Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Today's episode is a conversation with Jon Wertheim. You know him from CBS 60 Minutes, Sports Illustrated, and of course, Tennis Channel. This is kind of a good time to break off from the way I normally cover the sport. Let's face it, I always keep it very focused on the tennis itself, what's happening between the lines. Technical, tactical, nuts and bolts, details. Try to get into as much depth as possible when it comes to, again, the matches. But with Wimbledon kind of in the rear view, a little bit of a lull in the calendar, albeit some stuff to go over, which I will in the Open. This is a great time for the Jon Wertheim podcast, which I try to do every year. I feel like he covers a lot of these worldly issues as they relate to tennis. As well, if not better, than everybody else. And that's why I bring him on for this show, something that I always really, really enjoy. And I will give one specific tease on the Saudi Arabia matter with public investment fund money potentially being introduced to tennis and injected into tennis very, very soon. Jon did a story for 60 Minutes where he actually traveled to Saudi Arabia and had a conversation face-to-face with the Minister of Sport for Saudi Arabia. So he has great perspective on that issue in particular, but we get into other stuff like on-court coaching, like 2-week masters, PED, testing, suspensions, that has kind of popped up. And those are the main things. There were some things that I cut because we went so long. But before we get to that, I do want to talk about some of the stuff that we did see this week. First, UTS, Ultimate Tennis Showdown. Patrick Mouratoglou's new, unique, I would say, edgy, kind of rule-breaking tennis league exhibition. Prize money is great. They got a good field of players. Really the best field that I think they've ever had. Maybe they did better in the pandemic where they were literally not even competing with the tour at all. But now they had a great field and they had a crowd in Los Angeles. It was the first ever UTS in front of a crowd, which is really essential to creating anything worthwhile. You need to do it in front of an audience. So they were finally able to do that, and I watched every second of it. I was, paid to watch every second of it as I was hosting it for Tennis Channel. But nonetheless, I watched every second of it, and I want to talk about that. I come at it from this standpoint, this perspective. To me, there's nothing worse, literally nothing, than exhibition tennis that just feels normal. Like you take normal tennis and you take away the stakes, you take away the stuff that matters, and you just play a normal tennis match. There's nothing worse than that. I do not watch. I am not interested. Like the exhibitions that happen in December before the they happen in December before the Australian Open, right? When players are starting to kind of get back into it. And that's actually been a time of year where oftentimes they've gone to the Middle East, speaking of which, to play exhibitions. I don't watch. I don't care. I have no time for that stuff. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't happen or that they shouldn't do it, but I will not be watching because it's not interesting to me. This was not that. This was refreshing. This was interesting. I think the fans loved it. The biggest thing that I require of an exhibition in order for it to get my attention and capture my interest is to just find a sales pitch for me. Find a hook. Do something different. Do something interesting. Because if you're just going to play normal tennis and you're taking the stakes away, well, look, I'm sorry. I watch enough tennis all the time, all year round, 11-month season. I don't need more of it. So you have to bring something to the table that goes above and beyond what we see on a week-to-week basis. And UTS did this. So all in all, I think they deserve a lot of props for that. Just before I even get into any of the specifics. But now, let me just go down the list. Here is what was different. In no particular order. Music between points. Sometimes during the points. That completely changed the energy. I kind of liked it. The crowd was not told to be quiet during the points. The crowd was allowed to do whatever they want. You can stand up, you can sit down, you can walk in, you can walk out, you can yell, you can shout. There were no rules for the crowd. It was fine. It came off as very natural. There was not, it wasn't like everything was quiet and silent and somebody in the crowd would yell watermelon and someone would shank a forehand and be distracted. It never happened like that, because if you allow the crowd to do whatever they want, and especially if there's a lot of noise happening, no one voice is going to stand out among the rest and distract the players on court. So that came off as very natural, very seamless, and I didn't get the impression that the players were bothered by it at all. And at times it was kind of fun when, during a very exciting point or sometimes a very, very crucial point, you actually had the nat sound of the crowd reacting to shot by shot by shot. It actually created some pretty exciting moments in terms of the auditory experience of watching the tennis. There was no code of conduct, no point penalties for ball abuse, verbal abuse, racket abuse. All of that was out the window. That isn't really a huge selling point for me. I'll say Benoit Paire took advantage of that. It did, I guess, create some moments, but not a lot. Not a lot. But I did love the players actually talking to each other. There was one moment that came across to me as really, really good. There was a great rally, but at the end of it, Monfils made like a naked backhand unforced error. Complete mistake. That's how the rally ended. And Shelton over-celebrated. Like, he threw his arms up. He was running. He was raising the roof. He completely over-celebrated. And Gail saw that. And Gail at the time, gave it kind of like, what the heck is he doing celebrating like that after that shot? So Gail started giving it back. He started dancing. He started taunting. He started showboating. And then Shelton ended up quick serving him, like before he was ready, while Monfils was kind of giving it back, as I was just describing. And then Monfils started doing the crybaby at him. It felt in that moment like there was genuine animosity between Ben and Gail. And look, of course, it's going to be all good at the end of the match. But in that moment, I think that they genuinely believed that they were kind of ticking each other off. And they started trash talking each other at the changeover as well. Like, that kind of thing was really, really cool and really, really fun. 15-second shot clock. That's all they had between points. It was still the same thing. The chair umpire had a little bit of wiggle room when it came to when the clock started, when they called the score. But players certainly managed to do it for 45 minutes. Don't get me wrong. It was hard. And the changeovers were 3 minutes. So that was key, so that the players at the end of each quarter, 4 8-minute quarters, they could really kind of get their wind back. So it was definitely a physical push, but I would say the 15 seconds was great. It worked. It definitely kept the play going. Now, there was also one serve. I would say 15-second shot clock combined with one serve, that was a little much. It got probably a little bit too physical to the point where it was negatively affecting play. The players just weren't able to really work the rallies as well as maybe they ordinarily would be able to because of that combination. And I think the one serve thing was the biggest disruptor. It really took away a pretty essential part of the sport, and it was tough on the big servers. It felt to me like the most radical aspect of all of this was the one serve part, because it really did take away entire chapters of tennis strategy. And you look at a player like Fritz, a player like Bublik, a player like Shelton. By the way, all of those three players in particular did end up doing really, really well. But they couldn't really use one of the things that kind of makes them a great tennis player. Bublik was terrible. He went 0-2 in his first 2 matches and just looked completely lost out there. Finally won a match when he just decided to hit the first serve. Like, forget the faults, just hit the first serve. That was the best strategy. In terms of the actual scoring format, 4 8-minute quarters, first to 3 quarters wins. If it's tied 2-2, it was kind of this sudden death duel. Last couple things when it comes to interviewing the players and just, I guess, interaction and miking stuff up. I mean, there were interviews at every single changeover. I would say maybe there were a little bit too many. It got a little bit tiresome, especially after the fourth quarter. If I were talking to Patrick, one thing I would say he should adjust or he should change is that at the end of the fourth quarter, he should go right to the sudden death. There should not be another, changeover interviews. I would say those got a little bit tiresome, and maybe part of it was the line of questioning, but in general, it was great. In general, I liked it. I just think maybe we got a little bit too much of it. But it was very effective in getting out certain personalities. Wu Yibing especially. Like that's a funny guy. That's a guy who is a personality, likes to play around, does have some wit to him, definitely has a certain vibe. Ben Shelton, I thought, was the star when it came to personality in this 3-day event. Nobody came off better than him. He was, simultaneously competitive but also playful, and able to marry those two things, combining with a real comfort as a showman when it comes to just speaking, being on the mic and trash talking and putting on a show and connecting with the crowd. Absolute superstar in that respect. Gael Monfils was also great, but that came as no surprise. We know that. Lastly, coaching, mic'd up coaching. Some good stuff in there, but a lot of just clapping and yelling encouragement, which ends up being just kind of annoying. But, here and there were some good nuggets. I did like, in general, the idea that the coaches, and I get into this a little bit with Jon Wertheim, the coaches were made a part of the thing. Before the players walked onto the court, the coaches were introduced by name. What a concept that is. What a concept that is in a sport where coaching is legal, that the name of the coach would actually be announced to the audience, to the viewers, so that we know who they are. Like in every other sport where we know who the coach is. And they are actually made a part of the whole entire thing, interaction. That was good. Overall, high marks to UTS. Something new, something refreshing. And I kind of think it has legs, because I thought, if they can, that's a good fan experience. I think they can generate a lot of money. I don't know if they can get a great, media deal out of that. Especially with, the infrequency of it. But as a local traveling show, I feel like it can do really, really well, because it seemed like the fans loved it. And I enjoyed it. If you're going to give me an exhibition, give it to me like that. Well done, UTS. Well done, Patrick Mouratoglou. Let's go to the two tour events, the two ATP events last week. Mannarino wins Newport. Here's a guy who plays Newport most years, Adrian Mannarino. This was his 9th, had never made the quarterfinal. And I always just chalk that up to, the court doesn't bounce true enough. It's not consistent enough. So it kind of favors the really big servers. We did get Jensen Brooksby doing well a couple years ago, but, Cressy wins last year. That, to me, came as no surprise. Bublik has done well. That, to me, comes as no surprise. I just never thought that you could really play from the baseline there and that be the easiest way to have success. But it kind of seems like they just improved the courts. It seems like the courts got better. And that kind of, potentially opened up the opportunity for Mannarino to do it. But look, Adrian's had a great grass court season. I made him Wimbledon dark horse. I said that if he was fresh, he had a chance at beating Daniil Medvedev. I said that in the preview. So I think so highly of what Mannarino is doing on the grass. Unbelievable movement, consistency. The height of bounce is just a nightmare to play against. It is literally borderline unfair how low his backhand is bouncing. It just gives his opponents absolutely nothing to work with. And the precision. When it comes to depth, when it comes to angles, it's almost like you could put a 1 foot, 1.5 foot radius on the sidelines and the baseline, and Mannarino is going to put every ball within that radius. Absolutely spectacular. And that combined with the movement and the spin rate is why we see Mannarino as one of the biggest specialists on tour, if not the biggest. I use him as an example all the time of one of the few guys who still can be, a top 30 player, I would say top 20 player on grass, and he's not even a top 100 player on clay. He's one of the few players who still maintains that kind of disparity. The career records on grass, Mannarino, 69 wins, 46 losses, win percentage of 60%. On clay, he's 16 wins to 56 losses, win percentage of 22%. So congratulations to him for another title, third career title. All of his titles are after the age of 30. He's just better now. And I know I've said this before. He used to be one of my least favorite players to watch. I could not stand watching him. And now he's one of my favorites. So I just think he's become a lot more spontaneous, a lot more proactive in terms of trying to actually disrupt and create some offense from time to time, where I thought there was just a period in Mannarino's career where he was a really excellent world-class pusher, but also, again, kind of a pusher, and I just didn't like the way he was kind of going about his tennis. Again, now I absolutely love it. I think he's a joy to watch, so that's great. Let's talk about his opponent in the final, Alex Michelesen, 18-year-old amateur, committed to the University of Georgia. What stood out to me about him, very sound decision-making, very patient attack, felt super present, and had a great court awareness in terms of when to come in, when to play a trade, when to play a rally ball, when to change direction, when to inject pace. I really loved his shot selection. And he's 18. It's kind of rare. Usually, when an 18-year-old breaks out onto the scene, we're looking more at somebody like Holger Rune or even Carlos Alcaraz or Arthur Fils. The point I'm trying to make is you see guys who have all of these incredible raw abilities, but you're thinking, okay, they don't really know how to use it yet. Like Carlos Alcaraz's shot selection at 18 years old was pretty awful. It was pretty terrible. And then he had to kind of learn that. Same thing with like Arthur Fils right now, who's one of the best teenagers in the world. He's either 18 or 19. Unbelievable ability. Just doesn't really know how to kind of construct points yet. Alex Michelesen, kind of the reverse. Still got a lot of skills, don't get me wrong. I loved his volleys. I loved his flat backhand. But it feels like his head is the part that's actually almost there already, which is pretty cool. Bastad, before we get to Jon Wertheim, Rublev, Ruud, top two seeds make the final there. And I just have kind of a technical point to make to kind of paint a picture of how well Andrey Rublev was playing. Particularly, look, and every aspect was amazing. I mean, Rublev played probably the best match I've ever seen him play. It was absolutely stunning from start to finish. But I think the biggest thing that was kind of a game breaker for Rublev was how well he was hitting his backhand. And I thought that in itself was going to be the biggest annoyance for Casper Ruud and the biggest boon for Rublev's performance, because both of these guys, when they play each other, they're kind of avoiding the deuce side cross court. It's just not how they are going to get what they want. You know, by going forehand to forehand, they're both trying to draw the weak ball off of the backhand. It's just how they construct their baseline rallies, particularly on clay. And for Ruud on clay, a lot of it is breaking down the backhand with height. Let's get the ball high and heavy to a righty backhand, and now we're going to draw the weaker ball off of that backhand and attack with the forehand. So it's really about getting it to the ad side and then finding forehands off of the ad side cross court, off of that cross court rally, who's going to get forehands. That's what to look for when these two match up, because, you know, they're very similar in that respect. They're both trying to accomplish the same thing. And if you're going to look at it from that standpoint, quality backhands rule. Quality backhands are at an unbelievable premium. And more often than not, whoever comes up with more quality backhands or higher quality backhands in this case is going to have an upper hand in this head-to-head. We can look at it both directions. First, backhand down the line effectiveness. Take advantage of the cheat. Again, both players are going to the opponent's backhand and looking for the forehand, and they are looking for the forehand positionally, not only, you know, not just they're looking for it, they are actively hunting it and finding it. And part of that is the footwork and the cheating to the left to try to create the runaround. And if you're hitting great backhands down the line consistently, which Andrey Rublev was, you are taking advantage. You are countering the cheat left, because that backhand down the line goes into the open court, which if you are Casper Ruud and you are leaning left, you're going the wrong way. Just pause at the split step. Watch Rublev's backhand down the line winners and pause the video at the split step. You're going to see Casper Ruud more often than not off the center line of the court and jumping to his left. More often than not. But the backhand cross court is also a huge deal, maybe an even bigger deal than the backhand down the line. First of all, if you hit a quality backhand cross court, you eliminate the forehand. You eliminate the redirect chance off the backhand as well. If you hit the ball deep enough, if you hit the ball big enough, and you have Casper Ruud or Andrey Rublev trying to, hitting a backhand out of the ad side corner off of a ball that has a lot of quality on it, you can't change down the line off that ball. It's too difficult. You can try, and now you're looking at a low percentage attempt. So you have to go back cross, and you didn't get a forehand. And if your backhand cross court is good enough, obviously, to draw that weak backhand that everybody's looking for, now you get to cheat. You get your runaround forehand. Or you get to step in for your backhand down the line so you can redirect. That's how you have to look at this. It's a cross-court exchange, and the winner of that cross-court exchange is getting rewarded with that forehand or with that redirect opportunity with the backhand down the line. So, out of that ad side pattern, everything was happening for Rublev because he was hitting awesome backhands down the line, awesome backhands cross-court. And again, there's nothing worse in this head-to-head than hitting a bad backhand cross-court. That's what you want to avoid, and that's what Ruud sometimes does, sometimes with his slice, sometimes with his drive, and sometimes feeling the pressure and pulling the ball wide with his backhand cross-court because of the threat that Rublev was creating with his runaround forehand and with his backhand down the line. There was more to the Rublev performance other than his backhand. Great forehand defense, great serving, more variety than I've usually seen. Couple of serve and volleys, couple of drop shots. Some of them he mysteriously apologized. He was like, "Sorry, man, I know I don't normally hit drop shots. Just wanna apologize for my drop shots." But it was overall just an incredible performance from Rublev. And that is why it was, 7-6, 6-love, and didn't even really feel like Casper Ruud played badly. Here's Jon Wertheim. We're joined once again by Jon Wertheim of Tennis Channel, Sports Illustrated, and CBS 60 Minutes. Jon, I feel like we've been doing this every year, and it's always one of my favorite shows of the year. So I appreciate you coming back on to Monday Match Analysis.
That's very kind of you. Do I ask what that is behind you on the shelf, or should we save that for later? That looks suspiciously like the 2024 Olympic mascot, but I don't think that's what it is.
Are you, give me a color and then I'll try to help you out.
Red squishy toy. That
would be Otto the Orange.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, Syracuse. All right. You'll get a good laugh when you see the I can't remember the name of it. The mascot for Paris 2024, but
Okay.
looks derivative. Looks like
I'll,
adjacent to Otto.
well, Otto was first, so we know
Yeah,
who
exactly.
copied who.
Exactly.
So I want to start with something that nobody's talking about. It has not been in the tennis world. It was at one point, but it's coaching. At the start of the year, it was supposed to be that the trial towards the latter half of 2022 was going to come to an end, and then they were going to decide how to move forward. But interestingly, there was never really an announcement or a press release like, okay, we're going to continue the on-court coaching. This is how we're going to move forward. To me, Jon, and the reason why I wanted to start with it, this is a seismic change in the sport, and it's not really being treated like one.
There's a broader moral to the story. I agree with you 100%. A lot of people, self-included, had strong opinions about this, and it's sort of, I mean, I think tennis is susceptible to this, but I think we all are. That we clamor and we have great, strong opinions, and then change comes. And we don't think twice about it, and everybody wants to know, how do we end these best of 5-set matches? Do you play? You've got to have a 2-game margin. So we just play a tiebreaker. And finally, all 4 majors got together. They did this uniformly. You play this 10-point super tiebreak, and we kind of got on with our lives. And all of these opinions stopped. Same, I think the coaching is a little different because the objections I thought were broader. But yeah, I mean, in theory, coaching is here, and for all the discussion and debate that this has aroused for years, it's kind of not a big deal. And I think people would, I mean, you're right. It sort of was stuck under. I mean, it sort of, nobody said, hey, everybody, here's what we're doing, come and watch. I mean, it sort of was it was a soft push, but I don't think it's materially altered things. I don't think a lot of players have strong opinions about it. You don't hear about this as something that's had great material impact on matches. And we've all just kind of shrugged, honestly.
I'm still anti, and I won't go through all the arguments, but I still think it was actually better how it was before. I understand that it wasn't perfect before, but I feel like it was still a noble rule to have. And right. There were some inconsistencies there, but I think that's okay. But I do feel like the ship has sailed, and it just feels like this is the direction that it went. And almost the toothpaste is out of the tube. There will never go back. But the implementation to me is fascinating. First of all, do you agree with that it's kind of over? Like, this is how it's going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there were a sense that this was really a foundational change to the sport, but I think a lot of it's almost here. We'll take this in a weird direction, but it's sure. Almost like the first round play from the Grand Prix event in Hungary, where I think a lot of people took their lead from the players. And if players were upset about this, or if players thought this was advantaging them, disadvantaging them, having an impact on the outcome of matches, I think a lot of people would get more upset. But it's sort of like, yeah, I don't know, if the players don't think it's a big deal, maybe we shouldn't either. And yeah, I mean, I do think the ship has sailed, but I think if we want to continue the analogy, it is a this is a sunfish. This is a dinghy, and not Paul Allen's yacht. I mean, it's kind of not a big deal, and you did have a sense a lot of this coaching was kind of going on anyway. I'm like you. I'd prefer if players solve their own problems. I think it's more equitable. I think for financial, I mean, for 100 reasons, we could defend her.
Sure.
But I just don't think if the players aren't making a big deal of it, I think we all kind of take our cue from them to some extent.
I think perhaps every player thinks that their coach knows what they are talking about, and therefore it's, everybody thinks it's going to help them for the most part. I have heard a lot of former players who had entire careers trying to figure things out on the court. I feel like they've been a little bit more vocal about not liking it. Like some of our colleagues at Tennis Channel, I think have been against it. Sure. But if we're just going to assume that that's the way, I would just like some things to advantage the fans. Because you're right, the players have not the players have not been outraged by it. A lot of the players have, I think, taken on to it. But how about we think about this in a way where, okay, the fans are going to get some benefit from it. And I think the way to do that is to make the coaches part of this spectacle, part of this product. But instead, half the time, sometimes we don't even know who they are because there's not any sort of kind of official, which would never happen in other sports. They do not need to go speak to the press after the matches like the player does. Which is also exists in other sports. So it seems like they've become a part of it, but it's not like we're getting access to that.
It's funny too, because one of the points on the pro side was, hey, the sport needs all the celebrities it can get. We need to support the economy. We need more characters. We need more personalities. I mean, at one point, the WTA was making coaches available. So, all the players that reached the semifinals, they're coaches, Andrew Bettles and for Elena Slavin. I mean, sort of the 4 players who reached the semifinals, there would be press conferences for the 4 coaches. And that seems to have gone by the wayside. I think you're right. I mean, some of it is, there might be a language issue. Some coaches want celebrity more than others. But yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just weird because it just kind of, everybody had strong opinions. It kind of sort of got snuck in. It's like a rider in a bill. You're like doing the defense bill and you stick in the pork so laundromats get made, washing machines get made in Idaho. It sort of got snuck in and then everybody sort of shrugged. So yeah, I agree with your overall point. The whole thing is just kind of weird, but it has not. I mean, I don't think Novak Djokovic can say he lost the Wimbledon final for 100 reasons. I don't think sort of inferior, superior coaching would make his top 100 list. And so everybody's just, it's kind of typical tennis. Everybody's got a lot of opinions and a lot of outrage, and then it actually happens, and everybody kind of shrugs.
Yeah, totally. And I can totally imagine the conversation that was had with the powers that be. Should we do a press release? No, then everybody's going to have an opinion.
Exactly.
Let's just do it, not say anything. Nobody will notice, which is, again, to me, astonishing. Hey, maybe if they mic'd up the boxes, we could have a conversation about, did Goran tell him the right thing? Did Juan Carlos Ferrero's advice change? Right? Maybe if we had that access, those conversations could happen. Obviously, you have language stuff, but let's move on. So that's the first change in tennis of 2023 that I did want to talk about. Let's talk about 2-week Masters events. Jon, it doesn't seem like anybody really likes this.
Nobody really likes. No, I think you're right. Nobody really likes this. At some level, this is economics. At some level, this is, listen, ladies, you want equal prize money, fine, but we're going to have to get some more sessions out of it. I mean, it's funny to me that some of these 2-week events have had these so they still had scheduling issues, right? I mean, the Rome scheduling was a debacle. The Madrid scheduling was still problematic. The players say, listen, I lose early. I'll tell you, I was at the Ferrero Academy a few days before Roland Garros, and they were saying, well, JJ Wolf was just here. Like, JJ Wolf was at the Ferrero Academy in the hills of in Alicante, Spain. Yeah, he lost early in one of these events, and he had 11 days to kill. So I think if you're a top player, it is what it is. The prize money's gone up, but I think for a lot of players, it's a lot of dead time on the calendar. At the same time, this is a typical tennis problem, right? Where everybody has an opinion and alternative solutions aren't going to make anyone happy. So we all like mixed events. We all like the players making as much money as possible. We all think on equitable grounds, if not on capitalist grounds, equal prize money is a good thing. Well, the tournaments kind of need some sessions to play with, and they need 2 weeks. And yeah, it's not ideal on a number of levels. It's very strange that we're going to have these run-of-the-mill events that are going to last just as long as majors. There are a lot of players who are going to have a lot of idle time on their hands, but you can't have we can't have best of 5 matches and a 1:30 start time and then get upset when we don't make the curfew. I mean, something's got to give here. So I don't think 2-week. I don't think these events are necessarily ideal, but I get it from the tournament perspective, and I'm not sure there's a better alternative if I'm paying all this prize money and I'm paying for this 1,000 level designation. I don't want competing events. I don't want. It's easy to see a scenario in which the alternate final is sexier than mine. So I feel like it's not ideal, but it's sort of in the typical tennis way. We don't like democracy, but it's the worst system except for all the others.
Sure, sure. Uh, if it's best for the bottom line, then I guess that kind of overrules all. We're trying to the tournament. Everybody's trying to make money here, and that will obviously have its positive residual effects. And it does make sense why the 2-week format and expanding the premium product, which I think is the exact words that Gaudenzi uses. That checks out. But I am worried about the players because I know that just because they are off technically, that they might have an off day, does not mean that it's not still taxing to be away from home, to be at tournaments, and to not have matches to play. I don't think anybody wants that. I think what they want is to have their schedule full of tennis, and if they're not playing, then they can at least be home. But that's why you see like the Phoenix Challenger the week after Indian Wells, or I should say during the second week of Indian Wells, it's like a 500 because the Europeans aren't going to go back to Europe, and they're looking for matches. It's a really interesting situation. But I think to your point, and this kind of goes on to what we were talking about with the coaching, in 3-4 years, we will no longer be thinking about this.
Memories are short. Our outrage meters, again, I use the Wimbledon men's doubles matches were best of 3 this year. Did anybody care? Did anybody recognize it? Did anybody raise a stink? I mean, we debate about these sort of, we debate these issues, and it makes for good, lively discussion, and then it happens, and we move on to the next outrage. So no, I think you're right. I mean, I think. I don't know. Maybe there'll be mixed doubles. Maybe this will encourage more players to play doubles. Maybe there'll be some sort of creative solution. Maybe the USTA gets serious about setting up a real European base. So JJ Wolf and whoever, I think it was Marcos Garreau, don't have to finagle a few nights at an academy in Spain because they got nothing to do for 10 days. So maybe this will encourage some creative problem solving, but I think you're right. I mean, I think it's not perfect, but I'm not sure anything is.
Good idea. Have you offered that up? They should be paying you as a consultant. That's great. I'll also say I would like maybe some draw reform, because I think the first couple days in this format fall a little bit flat. I was on site in Miami. I'll just say it didn't feel like a Masters 1000, and it's nothing against the players who are out there, but they're trying to fill Hard Rock Stadium, and they can't because they're not a top 32 seed. So that's another thing that I'll add. Let's go to a topic that arguably I should have led with, but I wanted to ease into it. Let's talk about the Saudi potential for Saudi investment in tennis. And you're the best possible person I could be talking to about this. I know you went to Saudi Arabia for a story you did for 60 Minutes. Let's start with this question. Is it going to happen? I think before we get into the implications, we should start there.
Oh, you mean the Saudi investment? I think the question is just form. Yeah, absolutely. It's gonna happen. Sports are a priority. There's already, Taylor, I was gonna say Taylor Swift. Taylor Fritz won $1 million in Riyadh the week I was there. I think, I don't even know if it's official, but it's been an open secret for weeks and weeks and weeks that Jeddah is going to hold this mixed gen, this next gen event after Davis Cup. It makes sense on a number of levels. It's unquestionably there's going to be a Saudi presence in tennis. It's just a question of what is it going to look like, and I think they're two very different paths this could go down.
All right, I got to ask you then.
All right. Well, so what? One of them is, I think everybody kind of learned their lesson from LIV. I think the Saudis did. I think the PGA did. I think other sports. This is like Steve Jobs, right? Like you make the mistake, and then we'll come and figure out and do it better. And I think Gaudenzi said, "Listen, I love the investment here. We're always happy for more capital, but we're not going to see a rival tour. We can't have you competing against us the way you did with the PGA." And I think there were, I'm getting this secondhand, but good, well sourced, that there were assurances made. No. we'd like to play a bigger role in tennis. I think Saudi would like a Masters 1000s event. And then all of a sudden, I think other parties sort of sniffed this out and said, wait a second, if the Saudis are throwing money around, why don't we, it doesn't take much to, there's not always a lot of stability in tennis. And imagine if the Saudis, say, for example, just hypothetically, bailed out Tennis Australia in this United Cup, which is a real albatross and a money loser and an event that isn't, it wasn't set up to be what it is, and it sort of came about as a measure of defense. If the Saudis took over United Cup and suddenly had a partnership with Tennis Australia, and there is this looming players union, and there could have been a ranking system, though it was recently voted down. I mean, there's sort of elements there. If you wanted to start not necessarily a live style competing tour, but if you wanted to start some strategic partnerships, Saudi Arabia and this, the sovereign wealth fund, the PIF, I mean, that could play a bigger role. So I think the question is sort of, what is this going to look like? There's also, keep in mind too, there is a women's tennis tour that just parted with 20% of its equity for reasons unclear, that are searching for a home for their year-end event. That is the principal source of revenue for the entire tour. Well, they're not going back to China for this year-end event. Where else could you put? Well, you could go back to Dallas, but we all know that had its issues, and it did not draw particularly strong attendance. There's an oil-rich market. It's actually closer to the sports European Nerve Center than Fort Worth, Texas is. That might be happy to have it. So I think, anyway, the overarching point is Saudi wants to get into tennis. Tennis seems pretty clearly happy to partner with Saudi. And the question is this going to be like a title sponsor? Is this going to be, hey, listen, we'll try to get you some more tennis events. We'll help you with some exhibitions. We'll figure this out. You give us a lot of money. We'll be happy to put Saudi tourism on the net post. I mean, it'll look more like a traditional sponsorship. It'll be Mercedes, except for a country's private wealth fund. Is it going to look like that? Or is it going to look like something a lot more integrated? Again, I think it's pretty obvious. Tennis Australia would be, as they tend to with these sort of entrepreneurial matters, Tennis Australia might take the lead. Is this going to be a new entity, or is this going to be more of a traditional sponsorship model? And I think that's kind of the, existential question right now.
Okay, understood. A more granular question, just when it comes to the women especially. I read that until 2017, it might have been even 2018, that women were not allowed to even attend sporting events in Saudi Arabia. So it's a culture that's suppressed female participation in sports. Are they ready to embrace the WTA and host an event like that?
You want a good one, since we're live and I'm not part? Yeah. When I went to Saudi Arabia, it was a complete coincidence. It happened to coincide with this big exhibition. That, again, I mean, Taylor Fritz was there, Kyrgios, Medvedev, Rublev, Tsitsipas, Stan Wawrinka. I mean, it was a big field. Again, the winner took $1 million, and I was poking around. Andy Murray made it clear he did not want to go. He was not interested in taking his game to Riyadh. Mm-hmm. Who did I see on the grounds? One of the first people I saw when I got there was Judy Murray, who was there for a clinic and to, expose girls in Saudi Arabia to tennis. And I sort of thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Even within the same household, you have two very different positions. On the one hand, no, I don't want to, this is money I don't want, and I have sort of ethically, I'm not comfortable going there. Versus, this is a way to be a change maker, and this is a way. I mean, Saudi Arabia, as you say, I mean, 7-8 years ago was a much different picture. This is a country that has come. I mean, I don't think anyone would argue that. It's not perfect. There's still some human rights concerns that most people. This is still a country with a long way to go. But I do think it's. I think it's pretty much beyond it. I mean, these changes are occurring. This is a country that's liberalizing. There was Bruno Mars was there for a music festival in the desert where women without head coverings were going to the rave. Like, this is a country that's come a long way in a short time socially. Doesn't mean it's not perhaps cosmetic. Doesn't mean it's not masking some deeper human rights concerns. But I do think it's hard not to make the case this isn't sort of veering in a progressive direction. So I think, yeah, if you're Billie Jean King or Judy Murray, I think it's very easy to justify this by saying, listen, we're trying to be part of the solution. Andy Murray's probably justified by saying this is not somewhere I'm comfortable playing and I don't want to be seen as complicit. But even within the Murray household, you had two very different approaches to this issue. And yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if this was all, I'm not sure, on the eve of Wimbledon, Billie Jean King sort of said, listen, I'm all about building bridges. And I think a lot of people were like, whoa, Billie Jean King? And I don't know if she was caught. I mean, I still am curious if that had been a plant, if that had been a setup, if that was supporting Steve Simon, who's sort of, perpetually embattled, or, if basically how much thought went into that answer. Either way, it was big news. But I think, yeah, for the WTA to say, listen, we want to be part of change, doesn't hurt that this is an oil-rich country I mean, you saw this Mbappe. I mean, this is just a completely different economic ecosystem. So that doesn't hurt. But I think it's really going to be interesting to see how this plays out. It's really going to be interesting to see how this is reconciled. It's interesting that this is coming off of the WTA 18 months ago. Didn't want to, they took their business out of China because it didn't comport with our values. How you square that with going to an authoritarian country where only a few years ago women were allowed to drive is interesting. But at the same time, it's a WTA. I'd like to see the WTA say, listen, we need some KPIs, right? We need some real markers of progress. And it's one thing to sort of have these flowery press conferences and talk about bridges and not walls. We need to see X. We need to see legislation passed that does X, Y, Z. We need to see homosexuality decriminalized. If in addition to taking the money, in addition to the rhetoric, there were actual sort of explicit markers of progress, that to me would be the ultimate win-win-win. I don't know if the WTA has that inclination. I don't know if they have that kind of leverage. But instead of just sort of saying we're going to give a bunch of tennis clinics and show girls you can achieve through sport, if there were some actual measurables of progress that were baked into any agreement, to me, that would be the real sweet spot for women's tennis.
Yeah, that would be amazing. And I truly hope that there is something there when it comes to the approach. Okay, we are going to kind of change it from the inside, or we are going to help them move forward. But at the same time, I do have a cynicism where, part of me, when it came to the live players especially, I just wanted them to say, look, this isn't about changing golf or making anything better. This is just about the price tag was too high. Yeah. And I can't turn down that money. It's too much money, and everything the price was right. And I think there can be a lot of truth to that. I think some golfers were willing to go there and just be like, none of this stuff is really my concern. This money changes everything for me.
When I was there, again, this was before Live Golf blew up, or before we had this merger, or whatever we're semantically calling it. This was, I guess, in December, and I talked to Kyrgios. He was absolutely, as one would expect. He basically said, I'm here for the money. I have no problem with it. No place is perfect. If they wanted to start a Live tour, I'd sign up tomorrow. Other players were cagier, and again, other players declined this invitation. So I do think, I mean, the money is the money. I don't think we're going to see players just basically saying, yes, I'm for sale, and they were able to meet my threshold. But I think sort of the way to play this, if I were Steve Simon, is, or whatever, if I were Gudenzi, if I were Nick Kyrgios, is, I come here with an open mind. Let's not be naive about the finances here and the fact that this is a different market than I'm used to playing in. But if we're serious about change, we need to see demonstrable change and not just press releases. And
then we'll see if the other side is on board after that.
Exactly.
I think that's a great point. I want to weave something else in here, which is that the WTA, and this kind of partially goes back to the 2-week Masters, they've basically put out a roadmap for equal prize money at 500s and 1000s, combined events by 2027, all events by 2033. But it's an unconventional business arrangement to me, because the WTA is saying we are going to match the ATP's prize money, and they're separate economic entities. So do you see it in a way as like the WTA is almost tied to whatever the ATP does, because they need to be able to match that payroll? To me, that's I'm happy for it, and I'm basically, my fingers are just crossed that like it's going to work out, and that economically what I see as a very unconventional arrangement is going to be able to kind of be executed.
We talked before about policy sort of being snuck in. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there are more than 12 people that care about this the way you and I do, but I have asked people to explain this to me, to one of these, explain it like I'm a fifth grader.
Okay.
And you get nowhere. I mean, the other component to this, and again, this is way inside baseball, but this $150 million from the private equity firm, right, that they got in exchange for 20% equity stake. So the $150 million, I've heard $100 million of that is going to support equal prize money. So here you are, you're basically leveraging 20% of your tour. It's getting, and 2/3 of that is getting pumped back into the players in the form of prize money. So it's just, the whole thing is baffling. Again, it makes for a great headline. I think a lot of us sort of reflexively, viscerally, we all want fairness. It's really problematic when Victoria Azarenka is playing on one court for X dollars and Novak's on the next court for Y dollars. But the way this is being achieved is just baffling. And I think it's really sort of destructive for the WTA. You bring in private equity to boost the prize money at your own events. How does that build long-term growth? And then what you said, if you're pinning this, right? I mean, this is like a currency hedge. I mean, a currency peg. If all this is pegged to the ATP, what happens when suddenly they make a deal with Riyadh and the Saudi private investment fund? The ATP prize, I mean, Andrey Gaudenzi does one deal and prize money could double tomorrow. What does that do to the WTA's commitment? I mean, I think it's sort of a moral argument in a capitalist that we
Sure.
all like equal prize money. We all want to see players paid equitably. Sometimes you get Alcaraz and Nadal, and the men say, this is crazy. How could the women want equal prize money? And sometimes you get Serena Williams and Naomi Osaka, and the women say, this is why we deserve it. So just pay everyone the same. But the way the WTA is going about this is just absolutely baffling to me. And between essentially paying for it yourself, right? I mean, it's basically, my son makes 10 and my daughter makes 6, and I slip her $4 in extra allowance. They may have the same net income, but it doesn't mean they're being paid the same in the open market. I mean, I just don't get, I support it and I don't get it at the same time. And I think you're absolutely right, though. When you peg this to the ATP, which is a separate entity, it's really dangerous, because the ATP could do one deal and their prize money could go up dramatically, by dinner time.
Yeah,
that's my TED Talk.
No, I'm with you. First of all, great nugget about where some of the private equity money is going, and yeah, it's not what you want to hear. You want to hear that it's going to be building up the organization for long-term growth, so that they end up bringing in more revenue. And then the other part of this is, I almost wish, and I think you'd probably agree, what if the WTA just said, we are going to be able to increase prize money by this % over this period of time, and now at least, you're not shackling yourself to whatever the ATP does financially. Yeah.
Especially when the ATP historically has shown, the ATP went to China when you didn't. The ATP, especially when the track record here of cooperation is not great. I don't think the ATP are going to make decisions based on whether this is going to help or hurt their female counterparts. I don't get it. And I'd love for Steve Simon or whoever to just spell it out in plain terms, because I've tried to get people and board members and agents. Nobody can give you a straight answer on this.
Let's change gears.
Carlos Alcaraz, Wimbledon champion.
Not yet, John. That's the prize at the end. Trust me. That's like
kidding. All right.
At the end
we'll
get
go
to
wherever you want. Go wherever you want.
more negativity here. Recent PED suspensions. I don't even know how much we
Yeah.
can say on this. No, I'm sorry. I know it's a gauntlet that I'm bringing you through. I know
Oh
you
man.
can handle it. You're the only guy who
Have
can
you heard
handle it.
have you heard about Zverev? We gotta get to
Right.
him.
Exactly.
No, I don't know. PED suspensions. Yeah, I
Do
mean they well
do
go
we
ahead.
just need to pay? Can
Let's
I just say that? Do we need to pay more attention to the TIU and PEDs in tennis, because it hasn't seemed like something that has loomed large in the sport, to be completely honest, for the most part. But then suddenly, I mean, Simona Halep is one of the higher profile examples, probably the most high profile example since Sharapova. But now there's been two in the last 2 months, and it feels like it's just been a little bit more visible. And both of them, in terms of Brooksby and Michael Emer, are not that they failed tests,
right.
but that they didn't report their whereabouts on 3 separate occasions. So just curious if you have any perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to report on. I mean I don't think it's I think it's the ITIA, the tennis has this anti-doping integrity unit. That I think, yeah, right, used to be the TIU, and there's not a lot of transparency, nor honestly should there be. It's very hard to report on, and we also have this phenomenon, sort of in keeping with this is our theme for the conversation. Everybody says we want a clean sport. Everybody says testing tennis needs to amp up its protocols, and then whenever there is a positive test, not only does the player say that they've been victimized and they've been wrongfully accused and that this is a false positive, but then other players line up behind them. So it's very tricky. I don't. I mean, just Simona Halep has been very adamant throughout that this is that she's a victim of the system and that there are delays. On the other hand, the substance for which that's the one of the few things that is made public is the substance and the nature of the doping offense. This is not something you find in mama's pasta or hair loss medication or jet lag medication, to use 3 recent alibis. The fact that her biological passport was inconsistent is concerning. I mean, I sort of, it's very hard to report on because you don't
Yeah.
get particularly far, and there's, I mean, as there should be. I mean, there should be a level of confidentiality. I always thought these provisional suspensions were strange, where you're basically lying to the public about why a player is absent, and yet doing others is, I mean, if you did otherwise, you sort of have this adverse inference. I mean, I don't know what to say. It's a little strange to me that a former number one player who beat Serena Williams to win her most recent major is either being completely railroaded by the system or has this credible doping violation hanging over her. And everybody's sort of like, I'll, we'll wait until the tribunal speaks again. And then the other, I mean, I would be a little, again, tennis is a transient sport. We've talked about this before with you don't know where you are necessarily. You're in hotel rooms, there's traffic, there are 100 variables. This is not like we report to the clubhouse, right? The Dodgers are going to be in the locker room 90 minutes before game time pretty reliably. You don't have that in tennis. So you understand why. I mean, Alizé Cornet, who I think is a very credible player, who I've always found to be very professional and dignified, she had an issue with this as well. And her response was, you try your best to make your whereabouts known. Sometimes that's not possible. Schedules change. You're on a flight. It's a very sort of, again, it's sort of this itinerant sport. At the same time, you understand it from the anti-doping perspective, which is, look, these are substances that leave the body. It is imperative that we be able to locate these players and do these tests without warning and knock on doors at 6 a.m., unpleasant as it is. And again, you sort of can't have it both ways. You can't say, I want a clean sport, and then you say, damn, here come the urine collectors waking me up from my nap. Something's got to give here. So I do have, without knowing the particulars, I do sort of reflexively have sympathy for players who, paperwork gets sloppy or plans change or they get caught in traffic or flight gets delayed. I mean, I wouldn't call Emer and Jensen Brooksby dopers. They just didn't avail themselves. I think the Halep is sort of a different bucket. And again, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe she'll be exonerated and we'll have to completely reassess how we think about tennis doping, or conversely, it's not a good look when the number one player in your sport is getting popped for, I don't have that substance in front of me, but I did
Me either.
look into it. This was not something that you sort of attribute to, the mislabeled supplement. I mean, this was fairly significant.
Yeah, which speaking of which, the tainted supplement, I mean, so many of these end up being that. And then, I don't know, Beatrice Haddad Maya, it happened, a couple of years ago, and it doesn't seem like it hangs on to her image. It feels like in tennis, you're willing to brush it aside, where maybe in MMA, we both love UFC. I think it really hangs on to fighters who fail a drug test, generally speaking. You,
I would,
you
yeah,
don't
my
agree?
response to that is no, I totally agree. But my response to that has always been, in one, you're
Oh, yes.
imposing physical harm on someone
Yes.
versus you're hitting a yellow ball across the net with 5% more pace or recovering. No, I think you're right.
100%.
I mean, I think, you go down the list of players and Tipsarevic and Cilic, I mean, you sort of go down the list. And I think tennis is pretty good about sort of, you've done your, you know, you've done your time, and we believe in second chances, and we believe in image rehabilitation. But I mean, even Maria Sharapova, very public case. I don't think that necessarily hangs over her. It's part of the story, but I don't think it's overtaken her
Mhm.
accomplishments. I just think the Hollop, it's very tricky because it's hard to get information, and you don't want, you don't want to be an apologist, but you also don't want Duke lacrosse either. So I think everybody's sort of taken a wait and see approach, which is probably responsible, but it's a little bit, it's a little bit unnerving that a former number one player has this doping violation hanging over her one way or the other.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. And I also have speaking of the UFC kind of comparison, I also have a natural suspicion, I would say, where players don't get to collectively bargain like they do in the other sports for what the terms of
Right.
the doping controls are going to be. For example, in the NBA, the players said, marijuana is being legalized in the United States in a lot of states, and we think, we would like to be free to exercise that legal right. And they actually had power to make a change in the policy when it comes to NBA drug testing. Tennis players have no such power. So when it comes to a Brooksby situation or an Emer situation, I do think that's something that should be brought into play, which is that the players have just no seat at the table when it comes to something like this.
Yeah, I would. And just to be clear, no, you're absolutely right. It was, this was collectively bargained, right?
Yeah.
So presumably the players gave up something, or there was a meeting of the minds. You don't have that in tennis. I mean, PTPA, in as much as we know what it is, this would be a great place for the PTPA to say, we want to collectively bargain. We want a drug policy that we have some input on. That hasn't happened. So you're right. I mean, maybe instead of the policy, maybe this thing about missing whereabouts, maybe that's something where we have some wiggle room. But yeah, in the absence of a union, that doesn't happen. The players are essentially told, here's the policy. If we call you up 3 times, you don't open your, you don't open your email or whatever it is, you are facing suspension. And there isn't the grievance procedure either. I mean, I don't know if you're Jensen Brooksby, where do you go to fight that? Hire a private attorney, I suppose, but it's not as though you go running to the, if this were a collective bargaining sport, if this were basketball or baseball or football, it's not just the policy, but the union helps you then mount your defense. I don't know what happens when you are a tennis player and you're Jensen Brooksby and you get that dreaded letter. I'm not sure, short of hiring counsel at your own expense, I don't know where you go with that.
Yeah, I believe you're on somewhat of an island, similar to how you compete in your sport by yourself.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm
Anything else? We
opening.
met domestic violence. We got,
No, we're I have some other topics, John, but it has I have kept you for a while, and you've soldiered through these difficult topics. Here's a fun one. Between the lines, if you're talking to someone who's trying to get excited about the next 2 months in tennis leading into the U.S. Open, or I can just ask you, John, what are you excited about?
What am I excited about? I mean, we had this tremendous final it was one of the best sporting events, never mind tennis matches I've ever seen, the men's final. But
Hmm.
before that, there are a lot of intriguing stories. And as someone, I think one of my big sort of talking points like is we miss Serena Williams, but you know what? You go to these tournaments and you don't hear her name that much. We miss Ash Barty, we miss Naomi Osaka, we miss obviously Federer, and who knows what's going on with Rafa. But you know what? There's still spellbinding matchups, and there's still great matches, and there's controversy, and they're underhand serves at 8-all in a match tiebreak. And you know what? I mean, I thought Wimbledon, in a weird way, sort of this Wimbledon disgorged more stories from Chris Eubanks to Mira Andreeva, Jesse Pacco. I mean, there were so many storylines, good and bad, and what's the status of X that came out of this tournament. Um, and some of this is, I think we have this sort of thing in tennis. How much of this is flash in the pan stuff, right? How much of this is Raducanu or even Ostapenko? How much of this is lightning in a bottle? And how much of this is, boy, we are now seeing Marketa Vondrousova is going to go on a 4 major bender. So some of this is just sort of following progress. Is Chris Eubanks going to be able to back up that tremendous run he had? What's the impact on Medvedev of playing 5 good matches and then getting schooled by the 20-year-old? A lot of these storylines are sort of worth following. And then the big one, obviously, you're coming to the 4th major of the year, and Novak's won 2 of the last 4 majors, and the kid from Spain has won 2 of the last 4 majors, and they're 1 and 2 in the rankings. And you really have this sort of generational wrestling match. And Novak won the round in Paris fairly dramatically, not only winning the match, but sort of imposing himself physically. And then 5 weeks later, it was a much different result. Tennis is going to be fine. There's a lot of flux. There's a lot of craziness. There are a lot of players who came out with their stock higher after Wimbledon, and we'll see how they fare, here in this part of the world.
A lot of fantastic nuggets of gold in there that we can cling on to and look forward to. I'll add that the 3 players who have been so great on the WTA side are all under 25 years old. Sabalenka is 25 years old. And also, man, after that Wimbledon, it's going to be fascinating to see just big picture. Is that the one that got away from Ons, or is it going to be part of the greater journey that leads to her, conquering those demons and finally kind of getting to the promised land after losing her first 3 major finals? That's going to be really interesting to watch. Jon, you have a full year to recover from this obstacle course. And new issues will emerge, and I hope we will talk before then. But again, thank you for coming on Monday Match Analysis and navigating through these issues, because you are truly the person who I think covers these kinds of things better than anybody in our sport, and we're really lucky to have you doing that.
It's very kind of you. We will we can revisit this in a year and see how where our unforced errors came. But no, I mean, honestly, I think we love the tennis. You have a passion that's second to none. We love, but there's some really existential fundamental issues. I'm glad you touched on them. I mean, this isn't just some idle storyline to follow. I mean, I think a lot is going to happen in the sport, potentially for the better. It's not necessarily doom and gloom, but it's very easy to sort of get, it's very sad. We all love following Tsitsipas and Paula Badosa, and we all love what's Nick Kyrgios doing next. But I think it's important to sort of take a step back and sort of figure out where macro this sport is going, even if it's not always as fun and light and lively as talking about what crazy social media posts Nick Kyrgios issued. So thank you. A long way of saying thank you for doing this. Pleasure.
Thank you, Jon. Of course.